My first time in St. Louis was in 2018. It's fascinating to me from a personal standpoint is it made things come full circle for me. I didn't think I was gonna move here. I ended up moving here in 2020, but I didn't know that back in 2018. So what you see here on the left with the National Park Service outfit is me on a Civil War battlefield. Started my career, which would eventually become known as a celebrity historian, at Gettysburg, the battlefield, of course, in the East Coast of Pennsylvania, the bloodiest battle in American history. Well, I come to St. Louis in 2018, and I see a statue to Lincoln, to Abraham Lincoln. That's me standing next to it in 2018. Well, what's interesting, of course, is not just a tie to Gettysburg with the Gettysburg Address, but the only other place that that statue to Lincoln exists is Gettysburg. Two places, same artist, same mold, cast twice. One in Gettysburg, one in St. Louis. Couldn't believe it. Maybe that's why I ended up moving here, right? I was like, all right, that's it. I gotta come here. So I spent the weekend here in St. Louis, not knowing I would ever come back. I'd come here for a workshop. And on the left side, you see me at the my mother at the National Blues Museum, right out front, downtown, of course, not far from here, just a few blocks away. And on the right side, you see me with George Brock, the performance I saw that night, which actually turned out to be quite special. It is noted in his biography. This is a commemoration night for him, and I just happened to be here at that time. So that's me on stage with him afterwards. I was fascinated by the man. He could barely walk. He could barely talk. He could barely see. But when he got on that harmonica and sang, there was a whole different person. He just entered another world. Couldn't believe what I saw right here in St. Louis. The culture. And if you don't know about George Brock, what's interesting is he grew up in the Jim Crow South. He was born in 1930s in Mississippi. Was picking cotton. And by about 1950, so as a young man, he was a teenager who moves to St. Louis and makes his career, of course, as a blues legend. Now, he has now passed away, so you cannot see him anymore. He died when he was about 90 years old, plus or minus. So he's just before 90, went right up there on that street. So that's my story of St. Louis. That's how I got introduced to St. Louis. It was through the history and the culture of this place. And that's part of the reason I actually fell in love with St. Louis and why I live here today. So speaking of Jim Crow, how about Maya Angelou? We'll start with her from our different topics. Maya Angelou, in many ways, of course, is someone who was a voice to help complete the American dream. You see many moments here. The one I like especially is on the right side. You see there's a young lady up top and an older woman down at the bottom on the left side. But on the right side, she's receiving a National Medal of Freedom. She also got the Congressional Medal for the Arts at a different point. Certainly nationally accomplished. In fact, here's a trivia question for you guys. Now, of course, because of the context of this talk, we know that she was born in St. Louis. She also moved to Arkansas later on to live with her grandmother, and then moved around from there and built her career. So, trivia number one about Maya Angelou. What was her first job? Go ahead.
Trial.
Say it again?
Trial lady operator.
That's it. That's the right answer. She was a streetcar operator. I'm going to give you a choice of one of my books later on. All right. Here's another one then. Where is she recognized in St. Louis? Let me give you some context for this question. All right. She is in multiple halls of fame. She's in the National Women's Hall of Fame. She is in the Missouri Public Affairs Hall of Fame. She's in a couple of different Arkansas Hall of Fame. She's in the California Hall of Fame. She's in all kinds of different Halls of Fame. here in St. Louis, she is publicly recognized where? In the Loop. Who said it? You got it. All right. Here, you get a choice of one of my books. Choose one. Choose one.
What's your favorite?
Oh, you can't do that. You like my children. I got 3 kids. You can tell me that I'm the choose one that's my favorite? The books are my kids. All right. So see, good things happen when you participate. I reward you. If you want to stick around afterwards, I'll even sign it for you. Okay? Yes, sir.
There's a movement afoot to restore her original home there. I guess it's on Hickory.
That's right. There is. That's right. The original home is there, and there is. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, what I think is really fascinating to remember about Maya Angelou, and now she's relevant right now. Of course, she has many things we can remember, and we're going to, at the end of this, have a recital of one of the most famous poems by our poet over here, Basil. All right, so you need to stick around to the end. A couple things, speaking of recital. One, did you know that she started her early career doing opera, even over in Europe? She was a born performer. She'd go on to win Grammys in the 1990s with spoken word, 3 Grammys to 1. A poet winning Grammys because really great poetry is performed really well. No pressure, Basman. Got to put on that Grammy-winning performance. Grammy-worthy performance, please. But what's also fascinating about her is that she was a person of wide talents. For example, she got that streetcar conductor job sitting in the city hall, or in the city office, I should say, reading Russian literature until they finally just gave her the job. Not easy to get a job as a young Black woman at the era that she's trying to do so. So today, she is, if this works for me, on the US border. Fresh quarter coming out the US Mint. How many times have you seen that? Pretty cool, right? Well, it gets even better. Because I got it right here. Now, I'm not giving this one away. But this is straight from the US Mint. Proof copies. Now, they look like silver, but they're not silver. These are actual quarters. You can get silver versions if you want. They do have commemorative versions, but I got the actual quarter. They are in circulation as of last year, and you may be carrying it in your pocket. You just gotta look closely enough. She's on the tail side of the quarter. You're gonna see on here 5 women that are on here, and she's one of them. Let me give you some context. My slide. There we go. So there I'm on TV right here in St. Louis on KMOV, talking about the American Women Quarters Program, which is going on by the Mint 2022 to 2025. This is the first year to 2022 when she came out. I'm going to circulate this around. So I'll pass it around and handle it. Money is where nations honor their heroes. And on the same plane as George Washington, you have Maya Angelou. I think that really tells us something. Because it shows you that there are 2 sides to a story, 2 sides to the coin. I would say more than 2 sides, multiple sides to stories. In this case, the American story. Now, the quarter only has 2 sides, so you're limited to 2. That could be 4, 5, 10. But it also shows you that they need each other. And here's what I mean by that. George Washington and his peers' vision is completed, or at least pushed further along, with someone like Maya Angelou. So you don't have the improved fulfillment of George Washington and his peers' vision without someone like Maya Angelou and others. But on the other hand, you don't have Maya Angelou without the sacrifices of George Washington and what his peers codified into law that we take for granted. In the 1770s, it was not common around the world to espouse some of the ideals that those men did and put into our founding documents. And while incomplete in fulfilling them, set the standard, set that vision, set the dream, and set, I think, what we take for granted many times when we say X, Y, Z is part of our rights. Well, in many parts of the world, even today, and certainly at that point, virtually anywhere in the world, you wouldn't be able to say that. So it goes to show you that stories in history, I think, are rich in layers. And they need each other. You can't have one without the other. If I remove one or the other, my quarter is incomplete. I think having multiple sides and perspectives together helps us tell a more complete, a more full story. All right, one more trivia question here. Other than you folks right here, because you saw the quarters, can someone name me 2 women that are on those quarters from the remaining 4 in 2022? Give me 50%. 2 or 4. Sally Rod is 1. Can you get a second one? Where was that? Nope, not Mother Jones. The Sally Ride, the first American woman in space, is on there. Wilma Mankiller, who is the first principal Cherokee chief, first female principal Cherokee chief. The other one is Nina Otero Mora, who was a women's suffragist out of New Mexico and went on to become the first Latina congressional candidate. Almost won, barely lost. And the final one is, I'm forgetting myself. That's right, Anna Mae Wong, of course. I was in LA talking about that. Anna Mae Wong, the first Hollywood star with Chinese American descent. She also later became the first Asian American, period, to be on US currency. Just last year, big news. So this series is continuing on. You can see 2023, 4, 5. There's 5 women a year that are honored. And I've done TV segments on all of them in 2022, and I'm booked for a couple in 2023. So I continue to follow that series, and I try to do at least one TV segment on each of the women that are on the quarter, assuming I can get booked in their home market, if you will. So you can look out for that if you go on my YouTube channel, which you can see later. And you can look out for those TV segments as I travel around the country. I post them up, and you'll see more about any of these women. So let's go to peanut butter. Because Maya Angelou is from St. Louis, but is peanut butter from St. Louis? Well, so we all know the story that it started, or excuse me, at least was introduced or popularized at the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904, right? I think sometimes, unfortunately, we have these legends that, we repeat. It's not true. A lot of the things that we say were introduced at the World's Fair in 1904 were not, unfortunately. It's a big deal event, so we kind of assume that, hey, it had to be there. So peanut butter actually has a much longer history. Let's talk a little bit about peanuts first. Peanuts have been around for thousands of years, and they first show up in South America. We have evidence with the Incas. Not only do we have peanut evidence there, but we have evidence where they mashed it like a soupy substance and ate that. You could say that's a form of peanut butter. And we could, it's Depends on what your definition is, right? Here's what's funny is that the first time Europeans encounter this is during a colonial period when they're in Central and South America. They take it back to Europe. From there, it makes its way to Africa. Remember, there's a giant trade going on across the Atlantic of goods, people, all kinds of things going back to the Atlantic world. And it is Africans that then reintroduce it to the Western Hemisphere, particularly what we would call the United States. So isn't that funny? It kind of goes like all the way across the world and then back into North America. You don't have it in the US area until much more recently, historically speaking. It didn't make it up, as far as we know at least, from the Incas all the way up to North, what would later be the US. Furthest it made it is like southern Mexico. So that introduction is in the late 1700s, late 18th century, and early 1800s. But it's not peanut butter yet, at least not the way we recognize it. So let's talk about the popularization. So on the left, we have George Washington Carver. And on the right, we have John Harvey Kellogg. Y'all know like Kellogg cereal, cornflakes, same guy. George Washington Carver is from Missouri, not from St. Louis. He's from Missouri. He would go on to get a research position at Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. And that's where he did a lot of his research, found hundreds of ways to use peanuts. He became known as the Peanut Man. His influence, not just on peanuts, but on agricultural methods, agricultural studies, often surrounding peanuts, but beyond that, continues to this day in the ag industry. Of course, we're big in ag here in St. Louis, so his influence is also here in St. Louis, even though he was from a couple hundred miles away from here and teaching down in Alabama. Now, he's doing this in the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s, 1920s, around that turn of that century. Around the same time the World's Fair happens. At the same time, or similar time, you have John Harvey Kellogg. Now, he actually has a patent for nut butter. Doesn't indicate peanut necessarily, but for nut butter in 1895. So what is that? 9 years before the World's Fair? Now, it doesn't indicate which nut he's using, but he tended to favor peanuts because it was cheaper than almonds. And also he thought it tasted better. He said it's the most delicious nut butter you ever tasted. You guys agree? I'm just curious. Is peanut butter your favorite nut butter? Who's yes? Raise your hand. Is some other nut butter your favorite nut butter? Raise your hand if it's something else. All right, what is it? Almond? All right, here's one I love. I'm like crazy for nuts. That's why I got into peanut butter. Cashew butter. Expensive though. So I gotta like be careful. It's like a delicacy. I'm like, okay, I gotta just use a little bit. It's really expensive, but man, it's good. So I don't know. I might have a debate with Kellogg if it was me. Peanut butter is still great. I love it too. There's many ways you can eat it. It's just if it's nuts and nut butter, I like it. But I can have a discussion. It's like, you're making me pick from my books. Make me pick from the nut butter. I might give you a different answer each day. You know what I mean? Depends on my mood that particular day, which one I want. If I got a lot of money in the bank, I'll say cashew. If I don't, I'll say peanut butter. Now, what's interesting about Kellogg, though, is that he not only gets the patent, but he starts to promote it as a health food, as an alternative to meat. Who thought that? Like 100 plus years ago, people are looking for an alternative to meat. It's not new. It goes through waves, but there's a healthy alternative to meat. Protein, fat in there, tasty. One of the things he did that I think is fascinating, of course, great marketer. That's how he built the cereal stuff too. He used what we would call in our language celebrity endorsements. So, for example, he had the celebrity historian talking about peanut butter. I'm just joking. That's me. No, but he did use celebrity endorsements. Amelia Earhart is one of them. Henry Ford. You know how he did that? He promoted it to them. Sojourner Truth Another one. So he went and said, look, can you try my peanut butter and like it? That gets an attention, right? To this day, a celebrity does something, gets attention. What's so-and-so wearing at the Grammys, etc. So these are the ways that peanut butter is getting promoted early on. The work of Carver with the peanuts, work of Kellogg with the nut butter. Where am I? I don't even know where I put my, oh, see, look at that. That shows you I'm actually spontaneous. No notes. Don't notice. No notes. I know the stuff. You can jump in. It's not going to throw me off. But what else happens? Well, here's the St. Louis Tide. And I wish we said this story more instead of the World's Fair story. Y'all know sliced bread? All right. Well, my grandmother, who recently passed away, was older than sliced bread, literally. 1927, 28 is when sliced bread comes out, depending how you look at it exactly. She was born in the early 20s. So what's interesting about that is that is one of the big reasons that peanut butter takes off. Multiple things are happening in these same decades at the same time. Now, peanuts and peanut butter were kind of a pain to deal with from a commercial standpoint because it has a shell, it's hard to pick, clean, because it has that rough surface. So it wasn't like particularly widespread. But if you study marketing at all, in marketing, where there's a term sometimes that's thrown around that says remove the reason not to buy. So a lot of times something can have a lot of appeal. It can have 10 reasons to buy it, but if there's one reason to not buy it, you won't buy it. So if you remove the reason not to buy, that often has a better appeal, if you will, than having the reasons to buy. Well, one of the ways they do that is technology affects removing the peanut shells, makes it easier to market. And part two, easier to spread because of the sliced bread coming out. That's originally invented in Iowa. First person to buy the invention from Iowa and Missouri. Missouri's all over the place. In Chillicothe, Missouri, so western part of the state. Second person to buy it is a baker here in St. Louis. That's a bakery in St. Louis there on your left. Why does that matter? Well, in addition to the fact that you could argue the second purchase is more important than the first to help something take off, the second guy, he actually makes improvements to it, and that helps it take off even more. Help keep the bread fresh and a couple other components. The bread slicer here is taking off all over the place, right? But that's still not enough. Also around the same time, as we get more commercialized and more mass supply of groceries and the rise of grocery stores as we know them today, well, you got to have product that can distribute easily, right? Have you ever had peanut butter that, is like, if you make it fresh, it separates, it gets oily, it's like hard to deal with, trying to mix it and all this other stuff, but consumers don't like that. It's a mess. Remember a reason not to buy? There's another reason not to buy. It's kind of messy, right? Even before you get to the consumer, get to the supplier, they're like, we don't want to carry this, it doesn't have the same shelf life. Not easier to sell until they come up with hydrogenation. That allows it to give that creamy, texture. They take the technology that they've been using in like butter, Crisco, that, put it here to stabilize it. So think about it, if you buy like one of the major brands of peanut butter, usually it has that creamy texture. That's what it's going through. So it's easier to deal with and easier to spread. Now you can argue which one you like better or not in the taste, but that makes it much easier to spread around. So think about all the components that are coming together. The peanut and the widespread use of it. Kellogg promoting it. Grocery stores. And of course, there's suppliers that come up with the process and the sliced bread, which makes it easier to put on the bread and everything. multiple things come together at once. So by the time you get to World War II and beyond, it's a pretty big staple of the American diet. Now, speaking of staples of the American diet, beer. Now, let me give you a funny transition here. A reporter who was born in Nicaragua was asked, it was like on NPR or something like that, what made you feel like you're becoming American? And he said, the moment I realized I love peanut butter. Now, oddly enough, recently, peanut butter has outsold jam in the UK, but it's still seen as a very American thing. I think so is beer. Of course, it originates elsewhere. We can have this discussion too. Mesopotamia, popularized, of course, in Europe, Germany, etc. But today, I would argue that the United States has a higher quality beer culture than anywhere else because of the plethora of craft beers. And that culture, in some ways, starts right here in St. Louis, just a beer popularization. So what you're seeing there is National American Beer Day. And there's, funny enough, a lot of beer days. Like a couple days ago was American Beer Day or National Beer Day or something like that. Then there was National American Beer Day. And actually, that's part of the reason we put the talk when we did, because my Angelou's birthday was also a few days ago, on April 4th. So kind of put it together. So timeliness. But we featured a bunch of St. Louis beers when I went on TV in St. Louis for this particular holiday. So what is some of that history in St. Louis? Well, beer starts in St. Louis long before it was trendy the last 15 years or so. Beer starts in St. Louis in the 1840s as you get an influx of German immigrants here. By the time of the Civil War in 1860-61, you got 40 breweries here in St. Louis. That's pretty tremendous when you think about it. Remember, populations are smaller at the time. Later on, what happens, of course, you have the start of what would become later known as Anheuser-Busch. There's kind of roots with both Anheuser and Busch. By the way, all right, here's a tricky question for y'all, because I got to talk about this when I'm on Budweiser. Where does the term king of beers come from? You know, Budweiser, king of beers? Where does that come from? What's the story behind it? If you give me the essence of it, I'll give you credit. Anyone want to take a shot? Want to raise your hand? All right, let's try it. Let's see if this wire comes here. It doesn't. You might have to yell. You might have to yell. Good guess, but no. Not a good guess, but no. You know what, though? That's a good guess. I'm going to give you one. I'm going to give that one to you because I like that story. I like that story. That'd be a good one. Here, let me pick one. All right, so the real story is that Mr. Anheuser was from Germany. And there was a beer, well, it wasn't a brand, but Budweiser was beer that was beer of kings. So he took that and rotated it, king of beers. So it has to do with the origins. Thank you. So what happens at that point, you have, with the rise of Anheuser-Busch, you have Lemp Brewery, which is now gone, but that's the other big one. And by the time you get to Prohibition, you have quite a few breweries here, right? It's just exploding. Now, it's not just the German immigration, but what happens post-Civil War is the Industrial Revolution. And when the Industrial Revolution happens, there's improved ways to, for example, keep beer cold and store it. It's one of the things that Anheuser-Busch helps pioneer. So you can distribute it beyond your local area. Distribution is huge. We just talked about it with peanut butter. Distribution is so important to getting stuff. That's part of the reason that these breweries grow so big, especially in Anheuser-Busch, was promoting that. And of course, remember, St. Louis is what? The hub of a railroad system, right? At one point, the busiest railroad station, certainly in the country, and one of them in the world. So you have so many train routes that come through here, both passenger and freight, that it helps the distribution of this beer. So that's one of the reasons that St. Louis becomes a hub, not just because of the local beer scene, but becomes a national hub. You could make the case that this is the biggest beer city in the country because of those two factors. You have the German immigration in some other places like Milwaukee, but you don't have the combined factor with the railroad hub and the industrial advancements that makes it really the super beer city. Now, when Prohibition happens, the beers go away. See how many beers we got there? We're on TV having beer. Yes, at 9 a.m., live TV, anything can happen. I poured it. I didn't know if I was going to drink it. He drank it. I was like, all right, I'll drink too. So I drank with the guy at 9 a.m. enjoying some St. Louis beers. Right. Exactly. Got to start somewhere. I hear 5 o'clock somewhere. Yeah, for both. And that's how we talked about the story of St. Louis. Today, there is about 70 beer breweries in St. Louis. Pretty cool. That wouldn't happen without Tom Schlafly, who I'm standing in a photo with on the right side. He was one of the pioneers after Prohibition to help bring beer back to St. Louis and the United States. So St. Louis is kind of in the center of reviving craft beer too. So it's kind of twice that we've done this. What you see on the left side is Beverly Mill. Let me talk a little bit about architecture here, because we think architecture is typically not political, right? Just a cool little building, right? Let me tell you all something. When you study a lot of history, you realize that practically everything is political. Really, even things that look benign, often there's some political thing. We just did a class, I teach a free course to the public with a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. No grades, no homework. And actually, you can find information on it on my website also at celebrityhistorian.com. It's right there. You can't register right now because we're partway through, but I'll offer it again in the fall. Online, free, no grades, no. All you gotta do is show up live, or you don't even have to. I mean, I can't make you, but you can register, and you interact with a lot of guest speakers that I bring through. Big speakers from across the country to interact with historical topics. And why do I mention that? We just had a subject, as a quick aside, on the politics of the origins of Memorial Day. There's some pretty incredible politics behind Memorial Day, originating in the Civil War and Reconstruction and in that early Jim Crow period. Really fascinating. You would not think that something like that can happen. So many things. Well, that includes this building right here in St. Louis. Funny enough, there was, in Prohibition, one of the ways that breweries got by to try to stay open as much as they could. Most of them ended up shutting down, but a few of them survived, but they're trying to hang on. Kind of like, the way I imagine it, it's kind of like COVID, when that happened. Some restaurants closed, but they were still trying to hang on, and some made it, but you just find creative ways to make it happen. So here's a good trivia question for y'all again. Tell me, I'll make it easy. One thing that they did or produced to get by in Prohibition. All right, that's the first thing. I got to give it to you. Go ahead. I'll give you that, but the answer I'm looking for is not specific to Beverly Mill. It's what did breweries do in general. However, I'll give you that. So here, you can pick one, because I was not clear enough. Yeah. Yep. There you go. So once you're done, I'm gonna get one to give it to him too. You might have to come up because I can't get that far. Pick one. All right, we'll do one more. How about? I don't know how to pick. Which one was first? Do we know? Honor system. I don't know. Your point, Baz is pointing out. Here, all right, you in the back. They did do that, but that's not something they produced. I'm not gonna give you that one. All right, I'm gonna cut it for now. I'll cut it for now. We're gonna keep going forever. One of the other things they made was coffee, non-alcoholic beverages, which you mentioned. Those are two big things they're producing as products. Certainly, there were other ways they adapted in terms of the way that, um, you know, they were doing things like I said, going underground, speakeasy sometimes. But in terms of legal production of stuff, which is what I'm asking for, they're producing coffee, non-alcoholic beverage, and other things. One of the non-alcoholic beverages is called Bevo, funny enough. But Bevo Mill is made or is built before Prohibition. But when there's chatter about Prohibition, that's when it's built to help fend it off. Well, it didn't work, failed. Obviously, Prohibition came anyway. But there's politics behind it. It's supposed to be a quaint European-looking village. Let's say, I'm going to use a term like civilized looking, right? Not the crazy alcohol place, because that's part of the reason that they're pushing for Prohibition is negative effects of alcohol, is a perception. So there's a fancy chef, as you mentioned, a celebrity chef, you know, not celebrity historian, celebrity chef, right? And which actually, that's how I came up with this name. I'll just do a quick aside, because you asked me, how did the celebrity historian come about? I met Dr. Oz, who's a celebrity doctor, and I had seen these celebrity chef things, stories. So I thought, well, you know what? I'm on TV all the time. I'm going to call myself celebrity historian. And I threw it out on TV. Behind the scenes, and it went to the anchor. The anchor said it on air. Once the anchor said on air, he went all over the place. I was like, oh my God. So when I bought the URL, celebrityhistorian.com, which thankfully was available, because who else is calling themselves celebrity historian? And that's how Celebrity Historian came about. Connected to Bevo Mill and Celebrity Chef. The white tablecloth, beautiful fancy dining, civilization, if you will, but it didn't work. The storks up top for good luck also didn't work. But Tom Schlafly started after, well, let me tell you this about Prohibition real quick. Majority of the breweries closed, and then it started a decline in American beer. By 1980-ish, you have only 40 breweries in all of the United States. Remember, we had 40 in just St. Louis before the Civil War. Now we have 40 all over the United States and only one in St. Louis in 1980. Anheuser-Busch. 1980, after Prohibition. Years after Prohibition. You have more than that right after Prohibition, 1930s. So Prohibition ends in the 1930s, but the decline and the slide continues. Until you have Tom Schlafly in St. Louis, at least, who pushes for microbrews, craft brewers. Of course, today is Schlafly Beer, and then the others in St. Louis. But he was one of the early ones in all of the United States that helped bring this culture about. So we can thank St. Louis, maybe not for peanut butter, although maybe kind of, but we can also thank St. Louis for Maya Angelou. We can thank St. Louis for beer at first and then repopularizing beer twice, making beer a big deal in the United States. But St. Louis is where I think, in many ways, and when we call it a gateway to the West, but I think it doesn't do it justice. St. Louis is where cultures come together. You know, it's sort of the northern end of the South, the eastern end of the West, the western end of the East, southern end of the North, kind of the Rust Belt too. But that's in part because of, I would intertwine it to the story of, say, the World's Fair, one of the reasons it's here. I would intertwine it with the story of why beer is popular, because we talked about the hub that it was, the railroad. It's all interconnected, and that influences the culture. The rivers come together here, not just the Missouri and the Mississippi, but just a little further off the Ohio River. So you have east, west, all of it, all the connections, right? And so those cultures coming together on the old highways, which are the rivers, then the new highways with the railroad, and then the current highways, which we have a lot of highways that still come through here, is what kind of makes it this place where we really reflect so much of the country, both in effect importing cultures, but also exporting our culture. One of which is the beer thing that we talked about, and certainly Maya Angelou, right? Because Maya Angelou ends up traveling all over the world. Of course, we talked about how her impact is on the American dream. Peanut butter, sliced bread has a story here, even if it's not the mythology, the simplified story that we talk about. And certainly beer does as well. So what I want to leave you with is to encourage you to learn more. There are many ways you can learn more. One of them is to check out some of my stuff that I have. And I want to, at celebrityhistorian.com, you'll find a link to all kinds of projects I do related to history, including videos of my TV appearances from a lot across the country, some of the speaking if I record it, a workforce program I do to help bring people together around these stories, the stories that we talked about that are multi-layered, multiple perspectives, and multiple sides of the coin, how they need each other. It's not one or the other, but the story is more complete with everyone. You can even go to my YouTube channel, check out the videos, subscribe if you like, or you can even email me directly and kind of converse beyond that. But I want to give you a few minutes for some questions that are group questions. I'm going to give you one-on-one time later, but I want to make sure we have time for Basman to deliver her poem. So if you have a question that is good for the group, raise your hand. If it's a one-on-one question, we'll catch up afterwards. Go ahead. Because the question is, how is Beverly Mill political? Because the design of the architecture is specifically to try to hold off prohibition, because they're trying to show that we're sophisticated and civilized and not a debauchery of beer and alcohol. And at a point where they're trying to push for, where there's a movement for the prohibition with the image of alcohol being negative on society. That's why it's political. Yes. I do not know of any relation to Phyllis Schlafly. I do not. Oh, it's not? Okay, so I didn't know that. I'm not a Tom Schlafly expert, but okay, I didn't know they were related. Okay. Yes. The one here or the Gettysburg one? At the Missouri Civil War Museum. I mentioned I was at the Missouri Civil War Museum. That's in South County. If you go to the Missouri Civil War Museum, across from Jefferson Barracks. They're not affiliated. It's a separate nonprofit. They're not affiliated, but they're there because it makes sense. A lot of Civil War generals got trained at the barracks. Yes. I write it. I don't speak it. You know what? When I said Bevo, they told me Bevo. Now I say Bevo, you tell me Bevo. What's up with that? I don't get that. On TV, I can't. All right. I'm going to listen to the English teacher. I don't care what the TV anchor says. I'm going to go back and correct him. Yes. Oh gosh, what's the most interesting fact of history? That's oh man. How about this? I'll give you guys this, and I want to turn it over. A quick story. That's my most interesting. Fact is a little bit different. One of the sites I worked was in Martin Luther King home. And I was standing on the porch of the Martin Luther King home as a guy with a group of kids aged 10 to 13, all boys, scarred. One had the skull pushed in, one had lashes on the back of his neck. This is in 2010, all right? And as we're walking up the porch and into the MLK home, this is childhood home, which is a very nice home. We grew up in a segregated but economically well family in Atlanta. The chaperone revealed to me that these kids were escaped slaves. These kids were born around the year 2000. If you kind of do the math, it's 2010. They were escaped slaves from Haiti in the illegal human trafficking trade. They had just gotten to Atlanta, and the place they wanted to go was the MLK home. And that taught me two things. One, the power of place. They came to the historic sites where they felt they can engage and experience history and whatever that meant to them. And two, the power of King's legacy and what it means to the larger, let's say, American dream, which we've been talking about a little bit here. Because King died decades prior to these kids even being born, and he did his work in a different country, although he had some global advocacy as well. His primary work was here in the United States. And these boys connected, and that somehow resonated with them. That's what part of the story and the tapestry of the United States to me, whether it's a George Washington vision, which appeals to some, or the MLK vision because of their experience. These are some of the giants in American history, and the power of that story for the vision, I think, really reveals itself. And they chose a place to engage with it. Those two things are what I learned. That's probably the most interesting history moment of my life. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Basman for our recital of Maya Angelou. One on here? Oh, yeah, of course. Do you want me to just close it entirely? Okay. Oh, yeah, go ahead. I hope that closes it. Yes, there we go. But I don't know how to fix that.
You want to keep the clip share?
No, but I don't know how you take that down. I don't know if we could just turn it off, or I don't know how to do that. That's a Joe thing.
It's a joke.
Do you want this on here? Okay. Let me get out of your way. I'll just take it out. Yeah. Go ahead. There you go.
Great honors and respect for the intentionality of the words. I have printed here before, make sure. Memorize it. Drop a line, not a word. This is On the Pulse of the Morning by Maya Angelou. A rock, a river, a tree, host to species since long departed, mark the mastodon, the dinosaur, who left dried tokens of their sojourn here on our planet floor. Any broad alarm, their hastening doom is lost in the gloom of dust and ages. But today, the rock cries out to us clearly, forcefully, come, you may stand upon my back and face your distant destiny. But seek no haven in my shadow. I will give you no hiding place down here. You, created only a little lower than the angels, have crouched too long in the bruised darkness, have lain too long face down in ignorance, your mouths spilling words armed for slaughter. The rock cries out to us today, you may stand upon me, but do not hide your face. Across the wall of the world, the river sings a beautiful song. It says, come, rest here by my side. Each of you a bordered country, delicate and strangely made, yet thrusting perpetually under siege. Your armed struggles for profit have left collars of waste upon my shore, currents of debris on my breast. Yet today, I call you to the riverside, if you will study war no more. Come, clad in peace, I will sing the songs the Creator gave to me when I and the tree and the rock were one. Before cynicism was a bloody sear across your brow, and when you yet knew, you still knew nothing. The river sings and sings on. There is a true yearning to respond to the singing, the river and the wise rock. So say the Asian, the Hispanic, the Jew, the African, the Native American, the Sioux, the Catholic, the Muslim, the French, the Greek, the Irish, the rabbi, the priest, the sheep, the gay, the straight, the preacher, the privileged, the homeless, the teacher. They hear, they all hear the speaking of the tree. They hear the first and last every tree speak to humankind today. Come to me, here, beside the river. Plant yourself beside the river. Each of you, a descendant of some passed-on traveler, has been paid. You, who gave me my first name, you, Pawnee, Apache, Seneca, you, Cherokee Nation, who rested with me, then, forced on bloody feet, left me to the employment of other seekers, desperate for gain, starving for gold. You, the Turk, the Arab, the Swede, the German, the Eskimo, the Scot, you, the Ashanti, the Yoruba, the Kru, bought, sold, stolen, arriving on a nightmare, praying for a dream. Here, root yourself beside me. I am that tree planted by the river which will not be moved. I, the rock, I, the river, I, the tree, I am yours. Your passages have been paid. Lift up your faces. You have a piercing need for this bright morning dawning for you. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived. But if faced with courage, we need not live it again. Lift up your eyes. Upon this day breaking for you, give birth to the dream. Women, children, men, take it into the palms of your hands. Mold it into the shape of your most private need. Sculpt it into the image of your most public self. Lift up your hearts. Each new hour holds new chances for a new beginning. Do not be wedded forever to fear. Yoked eternally to bruishness, the horizon leans forward, offering you space to place new steps of change. Here on the pulse of this fine day, you may have the courage to look up and out and upon me, the rock, the river, the tree. No less to Midas than the mendicant, no less to you now than the mastodon then. Here on the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out and into your sister's eyes and into your brother's face, your country, and say simply, quite simply, with hope, good morning.
Is that the best? All right. Any questions you don't have for either one of us? Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Oh, I've not done primary research, but of course, Joseph Bacon, I've read it in the context of reading about civil rights, but I have not personally done primary source research on it.
I'm embarrassed to ask that we're reading, but it said that the selection of the site of a brewery is based on the quality of the water. Is that a myth?
I would say there's no evidence of that. I think some of the stories sometimes are kind of
and makes sense, but doesn't necessarily have evidence. This really always makes sense. Yes.
They have actually drunk quite a bit more alcohol than the average American today.
Absolutely true. As far as we have our documentation, maybe not every single individual, as usual, individual experience theirs, but if you do the aggregate as a culture, they drink all over the place. In fact, we have records of voting events and actually on election day and even at the voting booth. And that tradition carries all the way to after the founding fathers for a couple generations, the 1830s, 40s, 50s. You actually have straight up party agents get offering shots of whiskey and other bribes, like maybe a job for your brother or something like that, to get your vote. Because these votes were not secret ballots at the time. Let's remember, so everyone knows how you vote. So there's absolutely a ton of evidence for that, and that because people know how you vote, you can do that bartering, if you will. That's why we have alcohol laws on election day, although they're starting to go away now, but that's why they come up, all in that sort of wave of, not all has some negative effects sort of thing, and to some extent it worked, right? Even besides prohibition. Yes?
Is there any reason why she's not being addressed as doctor in Angelou, because she's a doctor?
I typically do not use that for anyone, like even for Sally Bly, maybe for my professors, they just call me by their name, but maybe in the future I can. But I just use their full name, is how I address, or not address. If I were to address them in person, whenever I talk about someone, I just say the name. Yes?
If you're requested by school, do they have specific, the question or the area they want you to go to? Or it's a story?
For me?
Yeah, like say a school request your service or a story.
Yeah, usually, so I have some, I would work with that school to see where we want to talk. Yeah, so I have some stuff I can talk about, like this or other things, like I have American Training Plus, or we could just customize something based on the situation. Yeah, it's just individual basis. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Yes.
It's a comment and a question. All of this comment. The last time I heard that was when it was read at moderation, and I remember that being a very hopeful time. And I have a hard time remembering another. I mean, it didn't come along. Just comment on that hopefulness.
Anytime we install a new leader, I'm sure we hope for the best. I thought it was very profound for Dr. Angelou to be asked to present something in the first place. For any of us that know and admire, recognize her work. And I recognized when I was asked to do this, I'm not an imitator. So there's no way, I wouldn't hurt myself by trying to imitate anything that Dr. Angelou does. So I wanted to bring my own interpretation. And there were some things, because of the event that she read it for, that I said the intentionality of the words, and I was really reading and digging into what it said, what it felt like. I felt an emphasis in other places because of where we are now. Honestly, I had thought to say it because there are lines in here that, songs I recognize, Down by the Riverside and the Tree That Won't Be Moved, And I said, well, this is probably not the place for the innovation of my singing interpretation of On the Pulse of the Morning. But everything about Dr. Angelou is inspiring. If anybody does, if you don't know her story or know where she came or what she came through, and all the phenomenal things she did, she wrote Phenomenal Woman because she is. So yes, it was just a tremendous honor to be asked. And as I said, as I read through it, it was like, goodness, there's so much contained in here. But then I'm also energized and uplifted by Amanda Gordon. So Amanda Gordon is carrying on the legacy that Dr. Angelou has given us. That's my interpretation.
All right, folks, let's call for the group questions. You all are welcome to come up and chat one-on-one and ask further questions. Thank you all.